This is our fourth lecture in the series from Chapter 10. This lecture is going to be pretty short, and it's all about forest fires. So last lecture we talked about forests, this one is forest fires. So first of all, there are several types of fire that can occur in a forest. Not all fire is equal. First of all, we have surface fires. Surface fires burn the underbrush, and most mature trees and wild animals will be able to survive. One of the cool things about surface fires is that there are a lot of different types of trees, including the giant sequoias, where the seeds require forest fires in order to be able to germinate. So again, surface fires, they burn only the underbrush. Most of the tall trees are protected from the fire by their thick bark, and the wild animals are able to survive because a lot of times they're able to evacuate the area before the fire gets there. Now, crown fires begin in the underbrush as a surface fire, but because there's a high fuel load or for whatever reason, they burn hotter and they burn faster, and eventually they spread to the treetops. Now, this may have something to do with what's called a ladder effect, where there are medium-sized trees that are not tall enough to be able to withstand the heat of the fire yet, and they act as a ladder. So the fire burns up the medium-sized tree and then is able to jump into the branches of the taller trees. So that ladder effect allows crown fires to start. Now, crown fires are very deadly. They kill wildlife, they destroy the forest. If I had time to show you a clip from Bambi, it's a great example of a regular fire, a surface fire, that begins as a surface fire and then turns into a crown fire. There's another type of fire called a ground fire. Now, ground fires burn the partially decayed leaves, particularly in deciduous forests, and they smolder and they spread underground. So these can be especially dangerous for firefighters. Ground fires look like they've been put out, everything looks good, but the fire is continuing to burn in the spaces between the leaves underground, and then it can erupt in a new place as a new fire. A lot of times the deaths or injuries that occur to firefighters who are fighting forest fires happen when a ground fire has occurred and it burns underneath the firefighters and pops up behind them in an area they thought was already cleared. So these ground fires can be very deadly. Now, the fourth type of fire is called a prescribed burn. Prescribed burns are planned and conducted by forestry agencies, and they're used to clear out the underbrush to make sure that surface fires don't turn into crown fires. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So here's a picture of a surface fire on the left, a really bad picture, I'll grant you, but it's a picture of a surface fire on the left. Notice it's burning the underbrush, but it hasn't spread to the treetops. Now, a crown fire on the right, you can tell it's much, much hotter. The flames are bigger. There's a lot more red in the picture. And you can see the little bits of fire there burning up in the treetops. Crown fires are fires that spread and burn hot. They can actually consume an entire forest. Surface fires, those four large trees are going to be able to survive a surface fire no problem because they have nice thick bark and the fire isn't hot enough to ignite the entire tree. So first quiz question for you. Which type of fire does not benefit the ecosystem? Is it A, a crown fire, B, a surface fire, or C, a prescribed burn? And I'll give you a second to think about that. And if you haven't figured out your answer yet, go ahead and pause so you can decide, because I'm going to reveal the correct answer, which is A, a crown fire. So crown fires do not benefit the ecosystem. They actually destroy forests. Surface fires benefit the ecosystem because they clear out the underbrush, they return nutrients to the soil, and they allow certain seeds that require fire for germination to be able to germinate and grow new trees. Prescribed burns benefit the ecosystem because prescribed burns are basically controlled surface fires. So they are set by the forestry agency, but they're managed very carefully. They also clear out the underbrush. They also return nutrients to the soil, and they also allow seeds to germinate. Now, benefits of surface fires, and we talked about some of these. So first of all, surface fires enhance the cycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. So when we have underbrush, this could be dead and decaying leaves, it could be small bushes, it could be branches that have fallen from trees. that underbrush is storing nutrients like nitrates and phosphates in the tissue of those dead plants or those small trees or things. When a surface fire moves through the area and it burns those up, it actually releases the carbon dioxide and then allows the nitrates and phosphates to return back to the soil in the form of nutrients, which enhances the growth of everything else in that ecosystem. Surface fires also help native seeds to germinate. Like we said, there are a lot of seeds, like the pine cones of the giant sequoia. Those seeds will never open and the plants will never begin to grow if there isn't a fire. So in areas where the government has prevented forest fires for a long time, we'll see very little new growth because a lot of those trees require fire in order for their seeds to germinate. Surface fires also destroy invasive species and give a competitive advantage to the native species. Native species are adapted to fires that occur regularly in ecosystems. A lot of times invasive species are not, so they aren't able to cope with a fire, whereas the natives thrive when fires happen regularly. Now, in a chaparral ecosystem, which is similar to where we live, Southern California, the Mediterranean sage scrub, the fire removes old brush and it reduces competition for resources, in addition to allowing some of the native seeds to germinate. So fires actually happen very regularly in the Mediterranean climate, like we have here, the chaparral climate, or the chaparral biome. And so it's a very natural part of the ecosystem cycling for fires to occur. In grasslands, fire removes the cover and allows sunlight to penetrate to the ground, which allows new growth. It helps to recycle the nutrients from the old dead grasses and allow new types of grasses and plants to be able to grow. And then obviously in forests, fires clear out the underbrush and they allow the nutrients to continue to cycle and help seeds to germinate. So these are all some of the benefits of forest fires, many of which we didn't understand until very recently, like within the last 10 or 15 years. Now, this brings us to fire management policies. I'm sure many of you guys remember or have heard of Smokey the Bear. Remember, only you can prevent forest fires. And he's got his big finger there, and so looking threatening. So our historic policy in the United States was to prevent all forest fires. We decided that forest fires are bad, they shouldn't happen, they're so destructive, no forest fires. So we were very, very careful to make sure that fires didn't occur at all. You know, everybody had to put out their campfires very carefully, put lots of water on them. It was a very big deal. Now, yes, we don't want forest fires to be started regularly, that's fine. Unfortunately, the result of this fire suppression policy, it's called fire suppression, the result was that the dense undergrowth was not cleared out by regular small fires the way it was supposed to be. So typically in a forest ecosystem, lightning strikes would cause fires once every year to 2 years, maybe every 3 years at most, and those small surface fires would burn through the underbrush, clear everything out, and allow nutrients to cycle. So the result of fire suppression was that we didn't have a lot of these little fires that occurred. We stopped them as soon as we could, and the undergrowth wasn't cleared out. Now, as a result, the fuel load increased over time. Fuel load is how much the fire has to feed on. So the fuel load increased over time. Year after year, we had more and more underbrush built up, more and more dead branches, dead leaves, more and more small bushes that would actually very easily catch fire. So what would happen is that when a fire would start because of lightning strike or someone being careless with a cigarette, it would burn much, much hotter and much, much faster because of that added fuel. So because the underbrush was still there and it hadn't been cleared out periodically, those fires would burn much hotter and faster, which would mean we'd have a more destructive fire. We would end up with a crown fire instead of just a surface fire. And the ecosystem would take much longer to recover. These are the types of incredibly destructive fires that we talk about, the ones that, you know, clear an entire area of forest, clear an entire hillside, and all that's left is just blackened stumps. So these are the kinds of fires that result from a fire suppression policy. Now, we have started to learn our lesson, and our new fire management policy is using prescribed burns to clear the underbrush periodically. Not that picture there. to the right is a picture of some firefighters overseeing a prescribed burn. So notice all of the large trees are just fine. They're mature trees. They have nice thick bark. The fire is low to the ground and it's just burning across the surface there. This is called a surface fire, like we talked about earlier. So the result of this new fire management policy, where they actually allow burns to clear the underbrush, is that the dense undergrowth is cleared out and nutrients are returned to the soil. The fuel load remains low, so that when a fire starts, it burns at a lower temperature. We end up with a surface fire, which is what we're supposed to have. So if lightning strikes, or if someone tosses a cigarette out of their car and it catches the underbrush on fire, there isn't as much fuel there. We end up with a surface fire instead of a crown fire, and that means that it's less destructive. The large trees are able to survive, and a lot of the animals are able to make it out of the habitat. We get seeds germinating. Everything's dandy. So I'm hoping that you guys understand the difference now between different types of fire. So crown fire, which burns the entire tree, versus surface fire, which is a good, easy, manageable type of fire, versus a ground fire, which burns underground, and then a prescribed burn, which is a surface fire that has been set intentionally by firefighters. And I'm hoping you guys also have a good understanding of our historic fire management policy, which was to suppress all fires, versus what we're doing now, which is using fire the way it's supposed to be used. Natural part of the ecosystem, clearing out the underbrush, helping things to regrow and regenerate in that fire ecosystem. As always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email or talk to me in class. Keep studying, guys. We've got our tests in just 3 weeks, so I hope you guys are all ready, and thank you for listening.